Okay, hi buddy. This is Michael Lister, and we're going to talk about silhouettes and silhouettes in terms of character design. You guys are going to be working on developing characters. You can set the task that they have to come from a um, background that has some form of culture. But before you get into any of that, I think it's interesting to look at silhouette design and to see how the different shapes of characters really make a difference. So there's a piece of text on the screen there for you. I won't read that to you, but I'll just kind of let you know that silhouettes are they're solid shapes that represent the person or the object. Um, think of them as kind of outlines or like a shadow for that character, and that you can kind of pick up that blank shape and define that character for you. And it'll give you an idea of what it looks like. It'll give you kind of like a recognizable shape, and something that you'll pick up at and sort of really quick glance at that character. Or even if the character's quite small on the screen, you'll still be able to pick that character out. So as a designer, your job is to create a silhouette that is instantly recognizable. Um, and some examples of that come from the Disney World. We've got here some of these characters here. If you can't pick out who they are, then you've not watched enough Disney. As you can see, looking at these characters, you've got the classic sort of Mickey Mouse shape in there. You've got Goofy standing over here, Donald Duck, and they're obvious. They're almost kind of straight away. You're picking out those characters, and that's not a coincidence, and that's not because you've watched the film 4 or 5 times. You may have watched some of these films only once. You can pick out these characters. You understand who they are. This is used in every single character design. So this is nothing new. I'm not telling you anything absolutely new here, but when we move on, we're looking at shapes of characters. It should make a bit of a difference to how you start designing your characters. Obviously, it's used in video games as well, and for video games, it's probably even a bigger thing to take note of, because when you're playing as a video game character, you tend to have many other characters on screen with you, be them sort of NPC characters or whether they're characters from massively multiplayer games where you've got hordes of people on there. Your character needs to stand out, and so in the case of Team Fortress, if you were one of the heavies, you'd know about it straight away just from the silhouette, and that's important. It's something that games are always kind of striving towards to make sure that their characters are recognizable. You can probably name many different characters based just off their silhouettes. So that is essentially what a silhouette is. So if we think about how you're going to start designing your silhouettes, first thing to think about obviously is reference. I would never attempt to draw a character from a Middle Eastern background if I hadn't actually studied the sort of clothing, the colours, and the fabrics that are worn from that character, the typical sort of size and shape of someone from that culture, the amount of makeup, the amount of everything. All of that needs to be analysed, and if you don't do that, there'll be flaws in the character, and it'll be very easy to see. The masters of this, or the previous masters of this, have been Disney. They've always known how to get their characters right, and I'm going to go into male and female sort of forms and how they make differences to the characters in a second. Before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about, if you're designing your character, you should really be looking at what sort of background that character has. Is there a sort of reason for that character to be the way they are and the shape they are and wear what they wear. And all those things need to be thought about before you just dive in and start drawing or start designing the silhouettes. So this is kind of looking at posing, really. I mean, we're talking about silhouettes, and a lot of silhouettes tend to be drawn kind of straight on, but later on down the line, you're going to be drawing those same silhouettes potentially from a posed position, and that pose is really important. A lot of people just tend to draw their characters just standing straight, and although that reads well if you want to be looking, for the 3D modeler's point of view, he wants to see what the character's wearing and how they're standing, then that's great. Draw it nice and straight. But if you're trying to sell a character as a character design, then you certainly need to be considering some of these things I've got on screen at the moment. So the first one is the action of the character. So if you are posing that character, what are they doing? It's very rare that you're going to get a character that's just standing completely bolt upright and not actually doing anything. So consider that. Look at the motivation. So if let's say the character is walking towards a door, right? Sounds pretty mundane. Okay, so that's the action, walking towards a door. The motivation could be many different things. It could be the character's walking towards that door to punch the lights out of someone, or they're walking towards the door because they've just broken up with somebody, or they're upset about something. So you need to think about that, the emotion and the feeling. So if they are walking towards that door, are they happy? Are they sad? Are they walking towards that door with any kind of intent? Or are they just kind of floundering towards that door? That makes a big difference. It makes a huge difference to the way in which you pose that character. Looking at the body and the sort of type of character that you've got there walking towards that door, it still does kind of work. Is it a light character? Is it a heavy character? But that is going to make a difference into how that character is kind of bounding along towards the door. So you tend to have the sort of heavier set characters. Will obviously they're heavier, so they have more gravity. So their weight is being dragged behind a lot more. What that tends to mean is that the larger or the heavier characters are slower in getting to their sort of destination, if you like. Or they're slower to begin that movement. So if you imagine someone quite heavy starting to run down a hill, they're going to start slower than someone who's light and nimble straight off the blocks, right? But when you get further on down that hill, that heavy character, let's imagine that both these characters, as they're running down this hill, fall over and start rolling down the hill, and your heavy set character, because of the weight and because of the gravity that's behind that character, is obviously going to start moving quicker. All of these things make a difference to how you're drawing that character. Same goes for, we can flip that and talk about, light sort of characters. Data, they can switch directions much quickly because they're not having to resist against the gravity that's pulling them away. If their entire body's moving in one direction, it's very easy for them to their weight to flip and move in the other direction. Okay, so flexible, energetic characters come from characters that are drawn with a sort of thinner frame. Looking at the appealing sort of view towards the character, this comes down to drawing. And Disney again, I can be the experts on this, where you could draw with rhythm and flow. So you tend to have sort of straight lines opposing some curved lines. So if you're drawing a character's arm, for example, probably got an example of a character that's got kind of straights and curves working along it. Here you can see on Jasmine's arm, you've got these sort of curved lines running around the bottom of the elbow and straight on the opposite side. So the best example right there, but we can see we've got one of the males. Okay, so Hercules, there we go. So we've got this straight edge here, little flick, and then again it's kind of got pretty much straight sort of edges, and then you've got the curves on the opposite sides. That's appealing. That's something that people look out for subconsciously when they're looking at characters. Okay. The other thing that I had on here was for us to look at the readability. This is just essentially looking at whether that character has a correct sort of line of action, whether they've got correct sort of center of gravity. If you've drawn a character and they're supposed to be sort of leaning over or something, and the character looks like it could quite possibly fall over because you haven't set the center of gravity correct, it's not its legs aren't in the right place to actually keep it standing, then it's going to fail as a character design. Okay. So with that, let's have a quick look at some different body types and the reasons why you would have certain body types in a certain way. So starting from the extremely thin in the characters such as Cruella de Vil. This has got a really thin frame. and we would tend to see smaller breasts that tend to be portrayed as villains. Apologies for the incorrect spelling. Tend to be portrayed as villains or somebody who's like pretty unlikable characters. And you can see from her, she has got quite an unlikable sort of figure and face, and this sort of slenderness just kind of leads to I guess it almost comes from like an insect background. Not a lot of people like them, so anything that's kind of overly thin is either like superly malnourished or cares more about other things, such as like taking over the world or whatever, than they would about their own sort of health and weight. Moving on to your classic sort of princess design, again you would have sort of the hips ever so slightly wider than the torso. Again, we're not looking at huge breasts in here. We're looking at a very small waist, though, and you tend to have the torso the same size as the head as well. And Jasmine's a great example of that. Another one would be sort of looking at, well, any of the Disney princesses, really. Ariel, for example, from The Mermaid, exactly the same sort of thing. Lois Griffin kind of sits in a realistic area. So if you're going to be designing a character that is kind of set in the real world, this is the kind of shape that you're looking for, and it's where you've got sort of you do have the shoulders and the torso slightly less than the hips, but the rest of it is a little bit more in proportion. You don't have the really tiny waist as you did on the princess. And then you move on and you kind of take that to the next step where you add a bit more weight, and in this case it's not adding weight to the waist, you're adding weight to the hips. And what that does is it kind of gives a super feminized look. Again, you don't have to have the great big boobs in order to like show off a feminine look. You can keep that fairly small, a little bit larger than you would say on the sort of princess and the realistic character. But you would have these sort of childbearing hips as the widest part, and this is a great character example in Miss Incredible. And you've seen many of the sort of comic book style drawings of superhero characters as well will have the same really tiny waist, not such massive on the top, but quite big on the hips. That's kind of just the style. All of these kind of references, by the way, are quite Americanized views. I'm not looking at sort of the Eastern views on characters. I'm just looking at the Western views on characters for now. So then we can take it from this and then really add the weight on. And here you'll find that we've got a character such as Ursula, again from a little sort of heavy set character. You do still have small shoulders. Now when you're drawing people who are a little heavier, bones don't grow, bones don't get bigger and fatter. It's literally just the weight that's running around the outside, the flesh. So bear in mind when drawing bigger characters that their bone structure isn't massive. It's just the fact that they're larger in terms of their flesh. So you still have relatively small shoulders, especially compared to hips. You'll have the weight sort of really kind of centering around the hips and the waist area, and that's what's known as sort of pear-shaped. Ursula is a great example of it. Okay, so we look at the male characters. I've laid this one out slightly differently, but we've got our extremely thin, goofy, sort of comedic character. You can see him here, a really thin sort of base, long, gangly arms. That's kind of a style that shows sort of what goofiness, I guess, is a perfect name for the character. Looking at the next example, you've got thin males. Now they tend to be sort of tech-savvy, geeky, nerdy, or sidekicks. And here you've got a great example of a sidekick with Robin. And you can see that the torso and the hips they're roughly the same. There's a small amount of difference in the torso, being a little bit wider than the hips, and that's just because you're drawing a guy. It tends to be, if you notice, in the female version, it's the opposite way around. So the hips start getting bigger and the chest tends to stay small. With the guys, it flips. It's the opposite way. So the hips stay small and the chest gets big. And as we start moving into sort of the more realistic characters, or the characters with shoulders wider than their hips, you get this sort of been to the gym, looks after himself, good guy sort of character, hero character. And there we can see Aladdin's got that sort of style. and it's bigger on the top than it is around the hips, but not to the extent of your superhero characters, not to the extent of your Hercules here, or imagine Batman, or even Superman. Sort of iconic drawings of those characters tend to have this really broad shoulders and broad sort of chest and little tiny sort of waist, not tiny waist, but a thinner waist. So that's where we kind of move on to next, and it's this super masculine, extremely sort of wide chest. Hips remain quite small, and you tend to get it with superheroes and over men, like sort of Johnny Bravo style. Then you can move on to the heavy set. This is the apple-shaped body. We're looking at sort of all the weight sat on the belly and possibly some man boobs. And the perfect character that I could find for this one was looking at the comic book guy from The Simpsons. Great big round tubby belly. You'll probably use Homer for this as well, but this guy's a little bit bigger. We've got a sort of little indentation there to emphasize or talk about the fact that there's some form of man boobage going on there. Little shoulders again, talking about, we were looking at Ursula. Shoulders don't get bigger, bones don't grow. These things all tend to kind of flow in, which is why you tend to have chubby people have these sort of rounded edges kind of running across their backs or running across their shoulders. It's because that weight or that skin has to still kind of fold around the bones that are there, and the bones are right inside the character. And then your last sort of view on sort of character shapes is this one here, and this is obviously kind of taking it to a bit of an extreme. I put a great big perfect circle in there, but this is the final character, and it's a sort of the squat. This is an extreme really, and we're looking at sort of short squat characters, often appear in comedic roles, where they can be displayed as sort of fun, lovable characters. So you think of Hercules, Phil Hercules here. Okay, so that's a quick sort of overview of what silhouette design is, or what character design is in terms of shapes and silhouettes. So your task really is to start delving into the research, looking at the sort of character that you want to design, and then really start thinking about who that character is. Start perhaps writing up 2 or 3 different bios of characters and reasons as to why they're living in this environment, reasons why they're from that background, and what were their sort of upbringing like, who were their parents, what was their job. All of these things are going to kind of tailor and sort of frame that character into some form of design. And without doing that, you're going to struggle, and you're not going to have a character that is appealing. So yeah, hopefully that helps you out a little bit, and we'll continue working on silhouettes and how to actually sort of draw these out using some various bits of software this morning. Okay.